The iron wheels of the locomotive screamed against the tracks as Penelope Blackburn's bloodied face pressed against the cold window of the passenger car. It was 1885, and the promise of a new life in San Antonio lay in tatters around her, much like the torn silk of her once fine traveling dress. She had boarded the train in St. Louis with hope in her heart, and her life savings sewn into the hem of her petticoat. Now, with the vast Texas landscape rushing by, those hopes were dying with each brutal blow from William Hargrove's fists. "Tell me where it is," William snarled, his breath hot with whiskey as he gripped her throat. His associates, two men whose names she hadn't caught, ransacked her luggage for the third time. No woman travels alone with nothing of value. "I've told you," she gasped, feeling her consciousness slipping as his grip tightened. "I have nothing but what you see." The larger of William's companions slammed her valise shut. "Nothing here, Will. Maybe she's telling the truth." "No." William's eyes narrowed dangerously. "She's hiding something. I can see it in her eyes." Penelope knew then that she wouldn't survive this encounter. The realization sent a surge of desperate strength through her limbs. With all her might, she drove her knee upward, catching William in the groin. His grip loosened as he doubled over, cursing viciously. Penelope lunged for the door, but the third man caught her arm, twisting it painfully behind her back. "You'll regret that," William wheezed, straightening slowly. "Boys, I think Miss Blackburn here needs some fresh air." Terror seized her as they dragged her toward the connecting door between cars. The train was moving at full speed across the Texas plains, the landscape a blur of golden grass and distant mesas. Penelope fought with every ounce of strength she possessed, but it was futile against three grown men. "Please," she begged as they forced the door open, the roar of wind and steel drowning her words. "Please don't do this." William leaned close, his eyes cold. "Should have been more agreeable, Miss Blackburn." Then she was airborne, her scream torn away by the rush of wind as she plummeted toward the unforgiving ground below. In that suspended moment between life and death, time seemed to slow. Penelope saw the vast blue sky, felt the wind tearing at her clothes, and oddly, heard the thundering of hooves. Archer Kincaid had been tracking the Trinity Rose gang for 3 weeks. A former Texas Ranger turned bounty hunter, he'd picked up their trail after a bank robbery in Fort Worth. The railroad had been their escape route, and he'd been following the tracks, knowing they'd likely disembark before San Antonio to avoid the larger contingent of law enforcement there. He hadn't expected to witness a woman being thrown from the moving train. Archer spurred his stallion, Thunder, urging him to a dangerous speed parallel to the tracks. He'd glimpsed the woman's fall from nearly a quarter-mile away, and every instinct told him he couldn't reach her in time. Yet Thunder responded to his desperate commands, stretching into a full gallop that ate up the distance between them and the falling woman. The mathematics of it seemed impossible, intercepting a falling body from a train moving at nearly 30 miles an hour, but Archer didn't think. He simply rode. His body leaned forward in perfect harmony with Thunder's powerful strides, his eyes locked on the tumbling form above. Penelope was certain these were her final moments. The ground rushed up to meet her with terrifying speed. She closed her eyes, unable to bear witnessing her own death. Instead of the crushing impact she expected, she felt strong arms close around her, followed by the breath-stealing jolt of being caught midair. The momentum sent both her and her rescuer tumbling from the horse's back. Archer turned his body to absorb the impact, cradling her against his chest as they rolled across the scrub grass and dirt. Pain exploded across his shoulder and back, but his grip remained firm around the woman's slight form until they finally came to rest in a cloud of dust. For several moments, neither moved. Penelope lay atop the stranger, too stunned to comprehend what had happened. Then, slowly, she raised her head to look into the face of the man who had impossibly saved her life. Dust-covered and grimacing in pain, Archer Kincaid stared back at her, his gray-blue eyes wide with disbelief at what he'd just accomplished. "Madam," he managed through gritted teeth, Are you hurt? Penelope's mind struggled to catch up with reality. She was alive. This stranger had caught her. The impossibility of it stunned her into momentary silence. "Madam," he repeated, concern deepening his voice. Her voice broke, tears suddenly streaming down her bruised face. "Yes, no, I don't know." Carefully, Archer shifted beneath her, easing her to the ground beside him. He sat up slowly, wincing as pain shot through his shoulder. It was likely dislocated, but that was a concern for later. His focus now was on the battered woman beside him. "Those men on the train," he said, his voice low and controlled despite the anger building within him. "They did this to you," Penelope nodded, touching her swollen cheek gingerly. "They wanted money, valuables I don't have either." Her voice was surprisingly steady now, shock giving way to the practical assessment of her situation. Archer stood carefully, then offered his good arm to help her up. "The name's Archer Kincaid, former Texas Ranger." "Penelope Blackburn," she replied, accepting his help. As she stood, pain lanced through her ankle, causing her to stumble against him. "I apologize, Mr. Kincaid. I believe my ankle may be sprained. Given that you were thrown from a moving train, Miss Blackburn, I'd say you're doing remarkably well." There was a hint of admiration in his voice as he steadied her. "My camp is about 2 miles back. Can you ride if I help you up?" Penelope glanced at the magnificent black stallion that was now calmly grazing nearby, seemingly untroubled by the heroics it had just performed. "I believe I can manage." Archer whistled softly and Thunder trotted over, nudging his master's chest with his velvety nose. "This is Thunder, best horse in all of Texas, as he just proved." Despite her pain and fear, Penelope felt a small smile tugging at her lips. "I'm inclined to agree with that assessment, Mr. Kincaid." With gentle efficiency, Archer helped Penelope onto Thunder's back before mounting behind her. The closeness was improper by any social standard, but given the circumstances, propriety was the least of their concerns. Still, Penelope felt a flush creep up her neck as his strong arm circled her waist to keep her secure. "I apologize for the familiarity, Miss Blackburn," he said quietly, seeming to read her thoughts. "But I don't want you falling again." "After what you just did, Mr. Kincaid, I think we're well past concerns of propriety." She tried to sound matter-of-fact, but her voice trembled slightly. The reality of her narrow escape was beginning to sink in, along with the knowledge that William and his companions were still on that train, potentially coming back for her once they realized she might have survived. As if sensing her renewed fear, Archer said, "No one's going to hurt you again, Miss Blackburn. Not while I'm around." There was such quiet conviction in his voice that Penelope found herself believing him, despite having just met the man. Perhaps it was the shock, or perhaps it was the desperate need to feel safe after her ordeal. But she allowed herself to lean back slightly against his solid chest as Thunder carried them across the open Texas landscape. Archer's camp was sparse but well organized, situated in a small grove of cottonwood trees near a shallow creek. A simple canvas tent, a stone-ringed fire pit, and minimal supplies spoke of a man accustomed to traveling light. As he helped Penelope down from Thunder's back, Archer's face tightened with pain. "Your shoulder," Penelope said, noticing his discomfort. "It's dislocated, isn't it?" Archer nodded grimly. "Appears so." "I can set it for you," she offered. At his raised eyebrow, she added, "I worked as a nurse during the latter part of the war. I was very young, but I learned quickly." Something like respect flickered in his eyes. "That would be much appreciated, Miss Blackburn." Once Penelope was settled on a bedroll near the unlit fire, Archer brought her a canteen of water and a clean bandana. "For your face," he explained. "I'll get the fire going after we tend to this shoulder." Penelope soaked the bandana and gently pressed it to her swollen cheek, watching as Archer positioned himself against one of the cottonwood trees. The efficient way he prepared himself for the pain that was to come spoke of a man familiar with injury. Ready when you are, he said, his voice steady. With practiced movements that belied her own injuries, Penelope took his arm and positioned it properly. On 3, she instructed. 1, she yanked sharply before reaching 2, manipulating the joint back into place with a sickening pop. Archer's only reaction was a sharp intake of breath and a muttered curse. Thought you said on 3, he remarked, rotating his shoulder carefully. People tense up when they're counting. Makes it harder, she explained, returning to her place by the fire pit. You should rest it for a day or so. Not much chance of that, he replied, already gathering wood for a fire despite her advice. Those men who threw you off the train, they're part of a gang I've been tracking. The Trinity Rose gang, been robbing banks and trains across 3 counties. Penelope frowned, recalling the men's conversation before they'd discovered her. They mentioned something about meeting others in Trinity. Is that a town? Archer's head snapped up. Trinity, Texas, about 40 miles southwest of here. That's valuable information, Miss Blackburn. They also mentioned splitting up after, something about Fort Davis being too hot now. A grim smile crossed Archer's face as he struck a match to the kindling. Sounds like you've got quite the useful set of ears, Miss Blackburn. As the fire caught and began to spread warmth through the small camp, Penelope finally allowed herself to truly consider her situation. She was stranded in the middle of the Texas wilderness with a stranger, albeit one who had saved her life with no money, no belongings, and nowhere to go. What brings a woman like yourself out to this part of Texas alone? Archer asked as he set a small coffee pot on the growing fire. Penelope hesitated, uncertain how much to reveal. Her circumstances were complicated and not entirely respectable by society's standards. I was heading to San Antonio, she finally said. I had a position waiting as a schoolteacher. It wasn't the whole truth, but it wasn't a lie either. There had indeed been a teaching position, arranged through correspondence with a Mrs. Alina Whitfield who ran a small school for girls. What Penelope omitted was that the position had been secured under false pretenses, her references forged, her qualifications exaggerated. When one was desperate to escape St. Louis and the scandal that threatened to destroy her, such deceptions seemed necessary. A schoolteacher, Archer echoed, studying her face in a way that made Penelope wonder if he detected her half-truth. Noble profession. And what of you, Mr. Kincaid? She asked, deflecting attention from herself. You said you were a former Texas Ranger. What do you do now? Bounty hunting, mostly, he replied, pouring coffee into a tin cup and offering it to her. Tracking men like the ones who threw you from that train. There's $5,000 on William Hargrove's head. That's the leader, dead or alive. You know him by name, Penelope observed, accepting the cup gratefully. Been tracking the Trinity Rose gang for almost a month now. Archer poured himself coffee and settled across from her. Lost their trail outside of Fort Worth, picked it up again along the railroad. Never expected to see them throw a woman from a moving train, though. I suppose I should be grateful for your persistence then, Penelope said softly. Archer's expression softened slightly. What did they want from you? They were convinced I was carrying valuables, money, perhaps jewelry. She touched the hem of her dress unconsciously, then caught herself. I told them I had nothing, but they wouldn't believe me. Archer's gaze dropped to where her fingers had brushed the fabric, his eyes narrowing thoughtfully. He didn't comment, however, merely nodded and sipped his coffee. I'll take you to the nearest town tomorrow, he said after a moment. Sweetwater's about a day's ride from here. You can send a telegram to San Antonio from there, let them know what happened. Penelope nodded, though the prospect filled her with dread. Without her savings, she had no means to start her new life. And without her new life, returning to St. Louis was her only option, an option that was no option at all. As night fell fully over the Texas plains, Archer insisted Penelope take the tent while he slept under the stars. Despite her protests about his injured shoulder, he was adamant. Been sleeping outdoors most of my life, Miss Blackburn. One more night won't kill me. Exhausted from her ordeal and lulled by the unexpected safety of Archer's camp, Penelope fell into a deep sleep within minutes of lying down on his bedroll. Her last conscious thought was of the strange twist of fate that had brought this man to her rescue at precisely the right moment. Archer lay awake much longer, staring up at the vast canopy of stars while his shoulder throbbed. Something didn't add up about Penelope Blackburn. She carried herself with the poise of a well-bred lady, spoke with the education of one too, yet traveled alone with apparently no money or valuables. And there had been that telling touch to her hem, a common hiding place for those traveling with something to protect. He didn't doubt she'd been victimized. The bruises on her face and the terror in her eyes when she spoke of Hargrove were genuine enough. But she was hiding something, and in Archer's experience, secrets had a way of becoming liabilities in dangerous situations. Still, as he drifted toward sleep, he found himself dwelling not on her secrets but on her courage. The way she'd composed herself after such an ordeal, the practical manner in which she'd set his shoulder without flinching, the clear intelligence in her green eyes when she'd relayed information about the gang. Penelope Blackburn was certainly not an ordinary schoolteacher. Of that much he was certain. Dawn broke with the distant howl of a coyote. Archer was already up, tending to thunder and preparing a simple breakfast of bacon and hardtack when Penelope emerged from the tent. She had done her best to make herself presentable, smoothing her torn dress and arranging her copper-colored hair in a simple knot at the nape of her neck. The bruises on her face had darkened overnight, the swelling more pronounced around her left eye and cheek. "Good morning, Mr. Kincaid," she said, her voice stronger than it had been the previous evening. "I hope you were able to rest despite your injury." Archer nodded, offering her a plate with a portion of bacon. "Slept fine. How's the ankle?" "Tender, but I can walk on it." As if to demonstrate, she crossed to the fire without limping, though Archer noticed she favored her right leg slightly. They ate in companionable silence, the early morning light gradually illuminating the vast landscape around them. It was Penelope who finally broke the quiet. "I've been thinking about your pursuit of the Trinity Rose gang," she said, setting aside her empty plate. "You mentioned they're heading to Trinity based on what I overheard." "That's right. Then wouldn't it make sense for us to go there instead of Sweetwater?" "It's in the same direction as San Antonio after all," Archer's brow furrowed. "Us?" "Well, yes," Penelope said, meeting his gaze steadily. "I can identify them. I heard their plans. I could help you." "Miss Blackburn," Archer said carefully, "these are dangerous men. You've already had a closer encounter with them than any innocent person should." "Precisely why I want to see them brought to justice," she replied with unexpected fire. "Besides, what exactly am I to do in Sweetwater with no money and no possessions?" Archer studied her face, noting the determination behind the bruises. "This isn't about justice for you," he observed quietly. "This is about survival." A flicker of surprise crossed her features before she composed herself. "Perhaps it's both, Mr. Kincaid." He considered her for a long moment, weighing the risks against the practical considerations. Having someone who could identify Hargrove and his men would certainly be useful, and she was right about her lack of options in Sweetwater. "Trinity's a rough town," he finally said. "And if Hargrove and his men are there, it'll be even rougher. You'd need to stay out of sight while I locate them." Hope brightened her eyes. "So you'll take me with you, against my better judgment, yes, but we do this my way. You follow my instructions without question. The moment I secure Hargrove, you're on the next stage to San Antonio." "Agreed, agreed," Penelope said, offering her hand to seal the deal in a surprisingly businesslike manner. As Archer took it, he was struck by the contradiction. She presented soft, delicate features paired with a spine of steel. "We'll leave within the hour," he said, releasing her hand. "It's a long ride to Trinity." The journey to Trinity took them across the rugged beauty of the Texas wilderness. Riding double on Thunder slowed their progress, but the stallion's remarkable endurance enabled them to cover significant ground nonetheless. They stopped only when necessary, to rest the horse or to eat from Archer's limited supplies. During these breaks, Archer found himself increasingly intrigued by his companion. Penelope possessed a wealth of knowledge that seemed at odds with her purported background. She could identify various native plants and their medicinal uses, discuss politics with surprising insight, and even demonstrated a working knowledge of tracking when she spotted signs of recent travel that Archer himself might have missed. "For a schoolteacher, you know an awful lot about surviving in the wilderness," he remarked during one such stop, as she expertly bound a poultice of crushed leaves to a minor cut on his hand. A shadow passed briefly over her face. "My father was a doctor who believed in practical education. He took me on his rounds in rural Missouri during the war. And the tracking skills," a slight smile touched her lips. "Not all education comes from books, Mr. Kincaid. I've had to be adaptable in recent years." There it was again, that sense that she was telling partial truths, revealing just enough to satisfy his curiosity without truly exposing herself. Under normal circumstances, Archer might have pressed further, but there was something in Penelope's guarded expression that gave him pause. Whatever secrets she harbored, they were hers to keep or share as she chose. By late afternoon on the second day, the outskirts of Trinity came into view, a dusty collection of buildings straddling the banks of a small river, with the railroad tracks cutting through its heart. They paused on a rise overlooking the town, taking in the scene below. "It's larger than I expected," Penelope remarked, unconsciously leaning back against Archer's chest as they observed from Thunder's back. "Railroad made it grow," Archer explained, pointedly ignoring the warmth that spread through him at her casual contact. "We'll need to be careful from here on. If Hargrove or his men are in town, they might recognize you," Penelope added. "Surely a bounty hunter of your reputation isn't unknown to them," Archer smiled grimly. "That's why we're going to make a slight change in appearance before we ride in." They made camp in a secluded grove about a mile from town. While Penelope tended to Thunder, Archer unpacked a small bundle from his saddlebags that he hadn't opened during their journey. From it, he produced a simple but clean dress, far less fine than Penelope's damaged traveling attire, along with a faded shawl and bonnet. "These belong to my sister," he explained, offering them to Penelope. "She left them in my care when she moved east with her husband last year. They should help you blend in better than your current clothes." Surprise and gratitude mingled in Penelope's expression. "Thank you," she said softly, accepting the garments. "I hadn't considered how conspicuous I must look." "There's a small stream just beyond those rocks," Archer said, gesturing to provide her privacy. "I'll see to my own disguise while you change." When Penelope returned some time later, Archer barely recognized her. With her hair hidden beneath the bonnet and the simple dress masking her elegant figure, she looked like any farmer's wife or shopkeeper's daughter. The bruises on her face were still visible, but less shocking against the modest backdrop of the bonnet and shawl. Archer, too, had transformed himself. Gone was the distinctive leather vest and gun belt that marked him as a bounty hunter. In their place, he wore a plain cotton shirt with a string tie and had exchanged his Stetson for a less distinctive hat. His Colt revolver was now hidden beneath a worn suit jacket rather than displayed openly at his hip. "You look like a respectable businessman," Penelope observed with a hint of amusement. "That's the idea," Archer replied. "We'll pose as husband and wife looking to open a dry goods store. It's a common enough story in these parts, shouldn't draw much attention." A slight flush colored Penelope's cheeks at the mention of posing as his wife, but she nodded in agreement. "What's our plan once we're in town? We'll take rooms at the hotel, make some casual inquiries about business prospects. That should give us a feel for the town without arousing suspicion. If Hargrove and his men are here, someone will know something these small towns talk. And if we encounter them directly," Archer's expression hardened, "then I'll do what I came to do, and you'll stay as far from danger as possible." They rode into Trinity as dusk settled over the town, the main street already illuminated by lamps from various establishments. The Trinity Hotel stood at the far end, a three-story structure that represented the town's aspirations more than its current reality. Most of the other buildings were single-story affairs: a general store, a barber shop, 2 saloons, and the inevitable blacksmith's forge. Archer helped Penelope down from Thunder with the solicitous care a husband might show his wife, particularly one sporting visible bruises that he had already decided to attribute to a stagecoach accident, if anyone inquired. They made their way to the hotel, where a balding clerk with spectacles greeted them with professional disinterest. "Room for you and the missus?" he asked, barely looking up from his ledger. "Yes, please," Archer replied, adopting a more genteel accent than his usual Texas drawl. "My wife and I are considering setting up a dry goods business here. Thought we'd stay a few days to get the lay of the land." This information perked the clerk's interest slightly. Trinity could use a proper dry goods store, nearest one's in Abilene. "I'm Harold Jeffries, by the way." "Pleased to meet you, Mr. Jeffries. I'm Adam Keller, and this is my wife, Patricia." Archer had decided using his real first initial, and hers might help them respond more naturally to their aliases. Penelope offered a demure nod. "Pleased to make your acquaintance, Mrs. Keller appears to have had an accident," Jeffries observed, his eyes lingering on her bruised face. "Stagecoach overturned outside of Fort Worth," Archer explained smoothly. "Which is why we're traveling by horseback now. My wife's quite the trooper." Jeffries made sympathetic noises as he had them sign the register and handed over a key. "Room 204, top of the stairs and to your right. Dining room serves breakfast from 6 to 9. Anything else you need to know about Trinity while you're getting settled?" "Actually," Archer said casually, "I was hoping to connect with an old acquaintance who mentioned he might be passing through these parts. Fellow by the name of Hargrove, William Hargrove. Tall fellow, dark beard." If the name meant anything to Jeffries, he didn't show it. "Can't say I recall anyone by that name checking in recently. But if he's looking to do business in Trinity, he might have stopped by the saloon. Most newcomers end up at the Red Spur sooner or later." "I appreciate the tip," Archer said, offering a friendly nod as he guided Penelope toward the stairs, one hand at the small of her back in a convincingly husbandly gesture. Their room was simple but clean: a double bed with a brass frame, a washstand with a porcelain basin and pitcher, a small writing desk beneath the window, and a rocking chair in the corner. The single bed presented an immediate awkwardness that neither acknowledged as Archer set their meager belongings on the desk. "I'll sleep in the chair," he said matter-of-factly. "You take the bed." "That's hardly practical with your shoulder still healing," Penelope objected. "The bed is large enough that we could both," she stopped herself, a flush creeping up her neck. "That is to say, we could arrange some sort of barrier." Archer cleared his throat. "We'll figure that out later. For now, I need to visit the Red Spur, see what I can learn about Hargrove and his men." "I'm coming with you," Penelope said firmly. "A respectable married woman in a saloon," Archer shook his head. "That would draw exactly the kind of attention we're trying to avoid. Then I'll wait across the street, perhaps visit the general store. But I won't sit idly in this room while you potentially walk into danger." Archer recognized the determined set of her jaw and knew further argument would be futile. "Fine, but at the first sign of trouble you return to the hotel immediately. Understood?" Penelope nodded her agreement, though something in her expression suggested she might have her own ideas about following orders in a crisis. The Red Spur Saloon was typical of frontier establishments: loud, smoky, and populated primarily by men seeking relief from the day's labors. Archer entered alone, having escorted Penelope to the general store across the street with strict instructions to remain there until he returned for her. He ordered a whiskey at the bar, using the opportunity to survey the room while engaging the bartender in casual conversation. The place was busy but not crowded, with most tables occupied by locals enjoying an evening drink. A poker game was underway in one corner, while a piano player half-heartedly tapped out tunes on an instrument that had seen better days. "New in town," the bartender asked as he poured Archer's drink. Just arrived today, Archer confirmed. Looking to open a dry goods store, name's Adam Keller. Marcus Doyle, the bartender replied, offering a handshake. Owned this place going on 15 years now. Trinity's a good town for business, growing every year since the railroad came through. That's so? Archer sipped his whiskey, letting his gaze wander the room again. Heard there might be some trouble passing through recently, train robberies and such. Doyle's expression shifted subtly. We get all sorts through Trinity. Most mind their business same as we mind ours. It was the kind of carefully neutral response that told Archer he was onto something. Wise policy, he agreed. Still, a man likes to know what he's getting into. Anything I should be aware of before investing in property here? Doyle leaned in slightly. Trinity's as safe as any frontier town, Mr. Keller. Sheriff Cole runs a tight ship, but I'd recommend not asking too many questions about other folks' business. Some take offense to curiosity. Before Archer could respond, the batwing doors swung open and 3 men entered the saloon. The immediate hush that fell over the room told Archer everything he needed to know before he even turned to look. These were men who inspired fear. William Hargrove stood in the center, his imposing frame filling the doorway. To his right was a wiry man with a pockmarked face, while his left was flanked by a hulking figure whose most distinctive feature was a jagged scar running from his temple to his jaw. All 3 were trail dusty, but moved with the confidence of men who owned whatever space they occupied. Archer turned casually back to his drink, angling himself to keep the newcomers in his peripheral vision while ensuring they couldn't get a clear look at his face. Whiskey, Hargrove demanded as they approached the bar, positioning himself just 2 stools away from Archer. Bottle, not a glass. Doyle hurried to comply, setting a bottle and 3 glasses before the men with noticeable deference. On the house, gentlemen, smart man, Hargrove remarked, pouring generous measures for himself and his companions. Thompson and Drake not with you tonight, they're seeing to our transportation arrangements, the pockmarked man replied with a meaningful look. Archer committed the names to memory. Thompson and Drake must be the other 2 gang members, possibly making preparations for their next move or securing their escape route from Trinity. And how is our lovely Miss Blackburn this evening? Hargrove asked with a cruel chuckle. Fertilizing the cacti somewhere between here and Fort Worth, I imagine. Archer's hand tightened around his glass, but he maintained his casual posture, even as rage boiled within him. Shame about that, the scarred man commented, draining his whiskey in one swallow. Pretty little thing. Pretty but stubborn, Hargrove replied. Could have made it easy on herself. You really think she had something valuable hidden in those petticoats? The pockmarked man asked. Wasn't about what she had, Jenkins, Hargrove said with an ugly smile. Was about what she saw. Woman like that, traveling on her own, overhearing our plans, couldn't take the risk. Archer had heard enough. He finished his drink and laid a coin on the bar, nodding to Doyle before making his way toward the door without looking directly at Hargrove and his men. Every instinct screamed for him to draw his hidden weapon and end William Hargrove's miserable existence right there. But there were too many civilians present, and he needed to get Penelope to safety first. Now that he knew the Trinity Rose gang was indeed in town, they would need to adjust their plans. As he stepped onto the boardwalk outside the Red Spur, he glanced across to the general store, expecting to see a lamp still burning as Penelope waited for him. Instead, the store was dark, its windows reflecting only the dim light from the street lamps. A chill of apprehension ran through him as he crossed quickly to the store's entrance, finding it locked and a closed sign hanging in the window. Archer's mind raced through possibilities. Perhaps the proprietor had closed early and Penelope had returned to the hotel as instructed. Or perhaps something had gone wrong. Given their luck thus far, he feared it was the latter. He was about to head for the hotel when a soft voice called from the shadows beside the store, "Mr. Kincaid." Relief flooded through him as Penelope stepped into the dim light, her face pale but determined beneath her bonnet. "The storekeeper closed early," she explained. "I was just about to return to the hotel when I saw them enter the saloon. You recognized them?" Archer asked, keeping his voice low as he guided her away from the main street and into the relative privacy of the alley beside the general store. "How could I forget those faces?" she replied, a slight tremor in her voice betraying her outward composure. "It was them Hargrove and the two men who were with him on the train. They threw me out like I was nothing more than trash." Archer placed his hands gently on her shoulders. "They believe you're dead. That gives us an advantage, but it also means we need to be extremely careful. Hargrove said something in there about you seeing or hearing something you shouldn't have." "What exactly did you overhear on that train?" Penelope hesitated, her eyes darting away from his briefly. "They were discussing their next target, a gold shipment coming through Fort Davis next week. They planned to split up after Trinity, with Hargrove and two others heading to Fort Davis to scout the route while the rest secured supplies and fresh horses." "That's valuable information," Archer said thoughtfully, "but it doesn't explain why they were so determined to silence you. Bank and train robberies aren't exactly secrets once they've happened." Again, that slight hesitation. "Perhaps they simply didn't want anyone knowing their movements in advance." Archer studied her face in the dim light, certain now that she was withholding something significant. "Penelope," he said softly, using her given name for the first time. "I can't protect you properly if you're not honest with me. What aren't you telling me?" For a moment, he thought she might continue to evade, but then her shoulders slumped slightly. "They mentioned a name, someone they were working with, someone who was feeding them information about shipments and security. A deputy marshal named Lawrence Reed." Archer's blood ran cold. Reed was stationed in Fort Worth, responsible for coordinating security for valuable shipments through much of West Texas. If he was corrupt, it explained the Trinity Rose Gang's remarkable success rate and their ability to evade capture. "That's why they wanted you dead," he said grimly. "You overheard them discussing a federal lawman's corruption." Penelope nodded. "I didn't realize the significance at the time. It was only when they became so violent that I understood it must have been important." "It's important enough to get you killed," Archer confirmed. "And now we have another problem. If Reed is corrupt, then sending a telegram to any law enforcement about your situation could alert him to the fact that you're alive and what you know. So what do we do?" Archer considered their options. "We need to get proof of Reed's involvement, something concrete enough to take to higher authorities. And we need to capture or eliminate Hargrove and his gang before they can carry out their next robbery." "That seems like a tall order for one bounty hunter and a schoolteacher," Penelope observed with remarkable calm given the circumstances. "We'll start by gathering more information," Archer decided. "Tomorrow I'll visit the sheriff, feel him out. If he seems trustworthy, we might have an ally. If not, we proceed on our own." "And tonight?" Penelope asked. "Tonight we rest. Tomorrow will come soon enough." They made their way back to the hotel, careful to use side streets and keep to the shadows. Once in their room, the awkwardness of their sleeping arrangements resurfaced, but exhaustion quickly overrode propriety. Archer insisted on taking the chair despite Penelope's protests, and she was too tired to argue for long. As Penelope drifted towards sleep in the unfamiliar bed, she found herself studying Archer's profile in the moonlight that filtered through the thin curtains. He sat vigilant in the rocking chair, his revolver resting across his lap, a silent guardian between her and whatever dangers the night might bring. "Thank you," she whispered, uncertain if he could hear her. "For believing me, for helping me." Archer's gaze shifted to meet hers, something unreadable in his gray-blue eyes. "Get some rest, Miss Blackburn. We've got a long day ahead of us." Despite his formal address, something had shifted between them, a deepening of trust, perhaps, or the recognition of their shared predicament. Whatever it was, Penelope felt oddly comforted by it as she closed her eyes and surrendered to exhaustion. Archer remained awake long after Penelope's breathing had deepened into sleep. His mind worked through what they knew and what they still needed to discover. The Trinity Rose gang was in Trinity, planning their next move. Deputy Marshal Reed was their inside man. And somewhere in this dangerous equation was Penelope Blackburn, a woman whose secrets seemed to run as deep as her courage. As the night wore on, one thought became increasingly clear to Archer: his interest in Penelope had grown beyond professional obligation, or even the natural protectiveness he might feel toward someone he'd rescued. There was something about her that called to him on a level he hadn't experienced before, something that made her safety and happiness matter more than they reasonably should after such a brief acquaintance. It was a complication he hadn't anticipated and couldn't afford. Yet as he watched her sleeping form, peaceful despite the bruises that still marked her delicate features, Archer knew he was already in deeper than he should be. Morning arrived with the sound of wagons and voices drifting up from the street below. Penelope woke to find Archer already dressed and standing by the window, peering through a small gap in the curtains. "Good morning," she said, suddenly self-conscious about her appearance after sleeping in borrowed clothes. Archer turned, offering a brief smile that transformed his usually serious features. "Morning. There's water in the pitcher if you'd like to freshen up. I've been watching the street, no sign of Hargrove or his men yet." Penelope rose, wincing slightly as her various bruises and strains protested the movement. "What's our plan for today? I'm going to speak with Sheriff Cole after breakfast. While I do that, I'd like you to stay here out of sight." Predictably, Penelope frowned at this. "I'm not helpless, Mr. Kincaid, and sitting alone in this room all day will only draw more attention when the maid comes to clean." Archer considered this. Fair point. Perhaps a short walk around town might be less conspicuous, provided you keep your distance from the saloon and anywhere else Hargrove might frequent. "I could gather information as well," Penelope suggested. "Women often notice things men overlook, and they tend to speak more freely with other women." "Just be careful," Archer cautioned. "Remember, we're supposed to be husband and wife looking to open a dry goods store. Don't ask questions that would seem unusual coming from such a person." They breakfasted in the hotel dining room, maintaining their cover as they exchanged pleasantries with other guests and the staff. Archer was impressed by Penelope's ability to seamlessly adopt the role of Mrs. Keller, a shopkeeper's wife with practical knowledge of dry goods and a gentle manner that invited confidence. She even managed to extract useful information about the town's business climate and recent visitors without arousing suspicion. After breakfast, they parted ways outside the hotel, Archer heading toward the sheriff's office, while Penelope set out for a morning constitutional that would allow her to observe the town more thoroughly. Sheriff Nathan Cole proved to be a weathered man in his 50s, with a no-nonsense demeanor and sharp eyes that missed little. His office was small but orderly, with wanted posters neatly arranged on one wall and a gun rack containing a shotgun and several rifles behind his desk. "What can I do for you, Mr. Keller?" Cole asked after Archer had introduced himself and repeated the dry goods store story. "Just getting acquainted with local law enforcement," Archer replied easily. "Always good to know who's keeping the peace when you're considering settling in a town." Cole nodded, seemingly satisfied with this explanation. "Trinity's mostly peaceful. Get the occasional rowdy cowhand or drunken miner, but nothing serious for a while now." "That's good to hear," Archer said, leaning forward slightly. "I did notice some rough-looking characters at the Red Spur last night. 3 men, one especially large with a beard. Seemed like the type who might cause trouble." Cole's expression remained neutral, but a slight tension appeared around his eyes. "Those would be Mr. Smith and his associates." "Cattle buyers, I believe, passing through on business, Smith." So that was the alias Hargrove was using. "They seemed familiar somehow," Archer pressed gently. "I used to ride with the Rangers some years back. Wonder if I might have encountered them in an official capacity." This revelation caused Cole to study Archer more carefully. Rangers, you say? Which company? Company B, under Captain William McMurray. It was the truth. Archer had indeed served with the Texas Rangers before turning to bounty hunting, and McMurray had been his commanding officer. Something in Cole relaxed slightly at this information. McMurray's a good man, helped us with a situation here about 3 years back. That he is, Archer agreed, which is why certain faces stick in my memory. Those men at the saloon, I could swear I've seen at least one of them on a wanted poster. Cole was quiet for a moment, seeming to weigh his words carefully. Mr. Keller, or whatever your real name is, let me give you some advice. Trinity's a peaceful town because I make certain decisions about which battles to fight and which to leave alone. Sometimes that means looking the other way when certain individuals pass through, provided they don't cause trouble here. You know who they are, Archer said, dropping all pretense. I suspect, Cole corrected. And I also suspect you're not here to open a dry goods store. Bounty hunter, Archer nodded, seeing no point in further deception. Archer Kincaid, I've been tracking the Trinity Rose gang for weeks. William Hargrove and his men have robbed 3 banks and 2 trains that I know of, killed at least 7 people, and most recently threw a woman from a moving train because she overheard something she shouldn't have. Cole's eyebrows rose. That would be the wife you brought to town. She survived the fall, Archer confirmed. I happened to be tracking the gang along the railway when I witnessed it, managed to catch her. That's quite a story, Cole said, though his tone suggested he wasn't entirely convinced. But here's my situation, Kincaid. I've got 1 deputy, currently out of town delivering a prisoner to Austin. Hargrove has at least 5 men with him, all armed and dangerous. My primary responsibility is to the people of Trinity, not to a bounty. What if I told you the Trinity Rose gang is planning another robbery? A gold shipment coming through Fort Davis next week. This caught Cole's full attention. How do you know that? The woman they tried to kill overheard their plans. She also overheard something else: the name of their informant inside federal law enforcement, Deputy Marshal Lawrence Reed. Cole's face paled slightly. Reed, I know him. He coordinates most of the high-value shipment security in this region, which explains how the Trinity Rose gang has been so successful and why they were willing to murder an innocent woman to keep their secret. The sheriff rose from his desk, moving to the window to gaze out at the quiet street. If what you're saying is true, this goes beyond my jurisdiction. We'd need to bring in federal authorities. We can't, Archer countered. Not until we have proof of Reed's involvement. Otherwise, we risk tipping him off and losing our only advantage, the fact that they believe Miss Blackburn is dead. Cole turned back to face him. So what exactly are you proposing? I need to know when and where Hargrove plans to meet with the rest of his gang. If we can capture them all together, we not only stop the Fort Davis robbery, but potentially get someone to testify against Reed in exchange for leniency. And how do you plan to accomplish that without getting yourself and your lady friend killed? Archer smiled grimly. That's where I was hoping you might help. You said they don't cause trouble in town, which means they must trust you to some degree. Perhaps you could encourage that trust, extract information about their movements while appearing to maintain your policy of looking the other way. Cole considered this for a long moment. It's risky. If Hargrove suspects I'm working with you. The risk is necessary, Archer insisted. More innocent people will die if the Trinity Rose gang continues operating. Finally, Cole nodded. I'll see what I can learn. But I want your word that you won't make a move without consulting me first. I won't have a bloodbath in my town. You have it, Archer agreed, rising to shake the sheriff's hand. How can I contact you discreetly? There's an abandoned line shack about a mile east of town, just past the old Miller property. Meet me there at sundown. I'll see what I can find out before then. As Archer left the sheriff's office, he felt cautiously optimistic. Cole seemed genuinely concerned about corruption within law enforcement, and his desire to protect his town aligned with their need to capture the gang without bloodshed. It wasn't a perfect alliance, but it was more than Archer had hoped for when he'd entered the office. Now he needed to find Penelope and ensure she'd remained safe during their separation. As he turned onto the main street, his heart nearly stopped. There, emerging from the general store, was Penelope, and walking directly toward her from the opposite direction was William Hargrove. Archer didn't think, he reacted. With quick strides, he closed the distance between himself and Penelope, reaching her just moments before Hargrove would have. He slipped his arm around her waist in a possessive gesture that any husband might make and turned her smoothly away from Hargrove's approaching figure. "Darling," he said with forced cheerfulness, loud enough for those nearby to hear. "I've just spoken with the sheriff. Wonderful man. Says Trinity would be perfect for our business." Penelope's momentary surprise gave way to understanding as she caught sight of Hargrove in her peripheral vision. "That's wonderful news, dear," she replied, leaning into Archer's embrace with convincing affection. "Mr. Peterson at the general store was just telling me how much the town needs a proper dry goods establishment." Archer guided her quickly away, maintaining their facade while putting as much distance as possible between them and Hargrove. Only when they had turned onto a side street did he release his tight grip on her waist, though he kept her hand firmly in his. "That was too close," he murmured. "He almost saw your face." "I noticed him just before you arrived," Penelope admitted. "I was about to duck back into the store when you appeared. We need to be more careful," Archer said, his heart still racing from the near encounter. "Hargrove isn't a man who forgets faces, especially not one he believes he's killed. Did you learn anything useful from the sheriff?" Penelope asked as they continued walking, now heading back toward the hotel by a circuitous route. Archer quickly related his conversation with Cole, including their planned meeting at the line shack. "He seems willing to help, though I'm not entirely certain of his motivations." "You don't trust him?" Penelope looked concerned. "I don't fully trust anyone in a situation like this," Archer admitted. "Cole has been looking the other way while the Trinity Rose gang uses his town as a base. That suggests either corruption or fear. Or perhaps pragmatism," Penelope suggested. "A single sheriff against multiple armed outlaws isn't favorable odds. Maybe he's been biding his time, waiting for an opportunity like the one you've presented." Archer considered this. "Perhaps. We'll know more after our meeting tonight." He glanced at her bruised face, a reminder of everything she'd already endured. "I don't like the idea of taking you out to that line shack after dark. It would be safer for you to remain at the hotel." Predictably, Penelope shook her head. "I'm not staying behind. This concerns me as much as it does you more so, considering I'm the one they tried to murder. Besides, I gathered some information of my own this morning that might be relevant." Archer's eyebrows rose. "What information?" "I overheard two men talking outside the telegraph office. They mentioned Smith had received a message about the package being ready for pickup tomorrow night at Cryer's Crossing. From the context, I believe they were referring to Hargrove and possibly weapons or supplies for their next job." "Cryer's Crossing," Archer repeated thoughtfully. "That's an old ford about 5 miles north of here. Remote, not much traffic. It would be a good place for an exchange." "Exactly what I thought," Penelope agreed. "If the gang is gathering supplies for their Fort Davis operation, this could be our opportunity to catch them all together." Archer studied her with newfound respect. Her quick thinking and powers of observation continued to impress him. "You're remarkably good at this for a schoolteacher," he commented. A shadow crossed her face briefly. "As I said before, one adapts to circumstances." There it was again, that hint of a deeper story, a past she wasn't ready to share. Archer decided not to press, at least not now. They had more immediate concerns. "We'll tell Cole about Cryer's Crossing tonight," he decided. "If his information corroborates yours, we might have our chance to end this tomorrow night." They spent the remainder of the day in their hotel room, avoiding further risk of being seen by Hargrove or his men. The hours of confinement created an unexpected intimacy as they shared the small space. talking in low voices and occasionally falling into comfortable silences. Archer learned that Penelope had a quick wit and a surprising knowledge of literature, while she discovered his quiet passion for astronomy and his habit of humming softly when deep in thought. As dusk approached, they prepared to leave for their meeting with Sheriff Cole. Archer checked and rechecked his revolver, while Penelope changed back into the simpler dress and bonnet that had served as her disguise. "Ready?" Archer asked. As the last rays of sunlight faded from their window, Penelope nodded, her expression resolute. "Ready." They slipped out of the hotel through a side entrance, avoiding the busier front lobby. Thunder was waiting for them at the livery stable, freshly fed and rested thanks to Archer's arrangements with the stable hand. Once again they rode double, but this time Penelope seemed more comfortable with the closeness. Her body relaxed against Archer's as they made their way east out of town. The abandoned line shack was exactly where Cole had described a weathered structure barely visible in the growing darkness, set back from the road amidst a stand of mesquite trees. A thin wisp of smoke from the chimney indicated someone was already there. Archer approached cautiously, circling the shack once to ensure there were no unexpected visitors, before helping Penelope down from Thunder's back. His hand lingered on her waist a moment longer than necessary, a protective gesture that had become increasingly natural over their short time together. "Let me go first," he said quietly, drawing his revolver. "Stay behind me." The door creaked as Archer pushed it open, revealing Sheriff Cole seated at a rough-hewn table, a small lantern casting long shadows across the single room. He looked up at their entrance, his expression grim. "Right on time," Cole observed, gesturing for them to enter fully and close the door. "You must be the lady Mr. Kincaid rescued. Quite a miracle you survived that fall." "Divine intervention and Mr. Kincaid's exceptional horsemanship," Penelope replied with quiet dignity as she stepped into the shack. "I understand you're willing to help us bring these men to justice." Cole studied her bruised face for a moment, his own expression softening slightly. "No one deserves what they did to you, madam, and if Deputy Marshal Reed is indeed corrupt, that's a stain on all who wear the badge." "Have you learned anything?" Archer asked, getting directly to the point. Cole nodded. "Hargrove or Smith, as he's calling himself, plans to meet someone tomorrow night. I couldn't get the exact location out of his men, but they've arranged for fresh horses from the livery and mentioned heading north." "Criers Crossing," Penelope said, exchanging a meaningful look with Archer. "That matches what I overheard in town today." Briefly, Archer related what Penelope had learned about the package being ready for pickup at Criers Crossing. Cole listened intently, his brow furrowed in thought. "It fits," he confirmed when Archer had finished. "Hargrove has been asking about routes north of town, claiming he's looking to buy grazing land. And his men have been stockpiling supplies, food, ammunition, the sort of things you'd need for a major operation. So they're meeting the rest of their gang tomorrow night to prepare for the Fort Davis job," Archer summarized. "This is our opportunity." Cole leaned forward, his weathered hands flat on the table. "I've given this some thought. Criers Crossing is open terrain, not much cover, easy to see anyone approaching. If we're going to take them by surprise, we'll need a strategy." "How many men can you provide?" Archer asked. Cole's expression turned apologetic. "That's the problem. My deputy won't be back from Austin until the day after tomorrow. I've got 2 men in town. I trust the blacksmith and a former soldier who runs the feed store, but neither has law enforcement experience. So 4 of us against potentially 7 or more armed outlaws," Archer said grimly. "Not favorable odds, unless we use deception," Penelope interjected unexpectedly. Both men turned to look at her with surprise. "They believe I'm dead," she continued. "My appearance would certainly create a distraction." "Absolutely not," Archer said immediately, his voice sharp with concern. "I'm not using you as bait. I'm not suggesting you do," Penelope replied calmly. But consider this: what if Sheriff Cole were to arrest me tomorrow publicly? Word would surely get back to Hargrove that a woman matching my description had been taken into custody. It might force them to change their plans, create confusion we could exploit. Cole looked thoughtful. It's not without merit. If Hargrove believes you're alive and in custody, he might worry about what you've told the authorities. Could make him sloppy, desperate. It also makes her an even bigger target, Archer argued. If they learn she's alive, they'll stop at nothing to silence her permanently. They already want me dead, Penelope pointed out. This way, at least we control the narrative, and I would be safely hidden away while you confront them. Archer's jaw tightened as he struggled between tactical reasoning and his growing personal concern for Penelope's safety. I don't like it, he finally said. You don't have to like it, Penelope replied gently. You just have to acknowledge it might work. After further discussion, they refined the plan. Cole would publicly arrest Penelope the next morning on a minor charge. Disturbing the peace would suffice. Word would spread quickly in a small town like Trinity. Meanwhile, Archer would appear to leave town, ostensibly in protest of his wife's treatment, but would actually circle back to meet Cole and his trusted men outside of town. Together, they would set up an ambush at Cryer's Crossing, using the distraction of Penelope's arrest to catch Hargrove and his gang off guard. And where will Miss Blackburn actually be during all this? Archer asked, still uncomfortable with the plan. I'll have Mrs. Cole take her to our home outside of town, the sheriff replied. It's isolated, well protected. She'll be safe there until this is over. Penelope nodded her agreement. That seems reasonable. As they prepared to return to town, Cole pulled Archer aside while Penelope waited by Thunder. One more thing, the sheriff said quietly. I received a telegram today from the marshal's office in Fort Worth. They're looking for a woman named Penelope Blackburn, wanted for theft and fraud in St. Louis. The description matches your lady friend. Archer's expression remained carefully neutral. Is that so? I'm not saying it's the same woman, Cole continued. Just thought you should know. Telegram was signed by Deputy Marshal Reed. The implications were clear. Reed was already looking for Penelope, using his official position to track her down before she could expose him. I appreciate the information, Archer said evenly. Will you be acting on this telegram? Cole shook his head. Seems to me I've got bigger concerns than a possible theft charge in St. Louis. Corruption and murder take precedence in my book. Mine as well, Archer agreed, offering his hand, which Cole shook firmly. As they rode back toward Trinity, Penelope nestled against Archer's back, her arms around his waist. The night had grown cool, and he could feel her occasional shiver despite their closeness. Something troubling you? She asked after they had ridden in silence for some time. Besides the obvious dangers of tomorrow's plan, I mean. Archer considered whether to share what Cole had told him. On one hand, it was her right to know. On the other, it was yet another complication in an already complex situation. Reed is looking for you, he finally said. He sent telegrams to law enforcement offices in the region, including Trinity. You're wanted for theft and fraud in St. Louis. He felt her stiffen against him, her arms tightening briefly around his waist. I see, she said after a moment, her voice carefully controlled. I suppose that was inevitable. Is it true? Archer asked quietly, another long pause. Yes and no, Penelope finally replied. The charges exist, but they are not what they seem. It's complicated. We've got time, Archer said, slowing Thunder to a walk. The town was still a good distance away, and this conversation seemed too important for haste. Penelope took a deep breath. I worked as a companion to Mrs. Eleanor Whitfield in St. Louis, the same woman who later offered me the teaching position in San Antonio. Her husband, George Whitfield, was a banker and a respected member of society. He was also a predator who used his position to take advantage of vulnerable young women. Archer's grip on the reins tightened as he began to understand where this story was heading. After months of unwanted advances, which I rebuffed, he cornered me one evening while his wife was visiting relatives. When I fought back, he became violent. In the struggle, I struck him with a paperweight. I thought I'd killed him. Her voice trembled slightly at the memory. I panicked. I took money from his safe money I knew he'd embezzled from the bank and fled. I later learned he hadn't died, merely been injured. He pressed charges, claiming I'd attempted to seduce him, then robbed him when he refused my advances. And the teaching position in San Antonio? Archer asked gently. Mrs. Whitfield never believed her husband's version of events. She arranged the position for me to help me escape. The irony is that I actually am qualified to teach. I worked as a teacher's assistant before becoming Mrs. Whitfield's companion. Archer processed this information slowly. The money you took, that's what you had sewn into your dress, what Hargrove and his men were looking for. Yes, Penelope admitted. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough to start a new life far from St. Louis. Now it's gone lost somewhere along the railroad tracks when they threw me from the train. They rode in silence for several minutes, Archer digesting everything she'd revealed. Finally, he asked, "Why tell me this now? You could have continued to keep it secret." Penelope's voice was soft but steady when she replied, "Because I trust you, Archer, and because if something goes wrong tomorrow, I wanted you to know the truth. I'm not a thief or a fraud, just a woman who fought back against a powerful man and is paying the price for it." Archer's hand found hers where it rested against his stomach. "Thank you for trusting me," he said simply. "It changes nothing about our plans or my determination to see you safely through this." As Trinity came into view, its scattered lights glowing warmly against the night sky, Archer found himself wishing that circumstances were different, that they had met under ordinary conditions, that they could explore the connection growing between them without the shadow of danger hanging over them. But wishes wouldn't capture Hargrove or clear Penelope's name. For now, they had to focus on survival. The following morning dawned clear and crisp, a perfect autumn day that belied the tension coiled within both Archer and Penelope as they prepared to put their plan into motion. They had spent a restless night in their hotel room, Archer once again taking the uncomfortable chair while Penelope tossed and turned in the bed, neither finding much rest as the hours crept by. Now, as Penelope adjusted her bonnet one final time and Archer checked his revolver, they exchanged a long look that conveyed more than words could have: concern, determination, and something deeper that neither was ready to name. "Are you certain about this?" Archer asked, not for the first time. "I am," Penelope replied firmly. "It's our best chance to capture them all together and to find evidence linking Reed to their operations." The arrest went exactly as planned. Shortly before noon, when the main street of Trinity was at its busiest, Sheriff Cole confronted Penelope outside the general store. Their staged argument was loud enough to draw a crowd, with Cole formally arresting her for disturbing the peace and suspected confidence schemes. Archer played his part perfectly, protesting his wife's innocence while Cole firmly led Penelope away to the jailhouse. Within an hour, Archer had checked out of the hotel in apparent anger, loudly declaring his intention to seek legal counsel in the next town. He rode Thunder out of Trinity heading east, making sure he was observed leaving. Once out of sight, he circled back through a dry creek bed that allowed him to approach the rendezvous point without being seen from town. Sheriff Cole had arranged for Penelope to be secretly transferred to his home outside of town, where Mrs. Cole would keep her hidden until the confrontation at Cryer's Crossing was resolved. Meanwhile, Cole himself, along with the blacksmith John Mercer and the feed store owner Thomas Griggs, a former cavalry soldier, would join Archer at the crossing well before Hargrove and his men were expected to arrive. By mid-afternoon, Archer was concealed in a stand of scrub oak overlooking Cryer's Crossing, watching as Cole and his men took up positions that would allow them to surround the meeting place. The crossing itself was simple, a shallow ford where the road crossed a usually dry creek bed. Tonight, however, recent rains had left enough water flowing to require caution when crossing, which would slow Hargrove's men and make them more vulnerable. As the sun began its descent toward the western horizon, Archer's thoughts turned to Penelope. He hoped she was safely ensconced at the Cole residence, well away from the danger that would soon unfold. The revelation of her past had only deepened his admiration for her courage and resilience. Few women or men, for that matter, would have had the presence of mind to survive what she had endured, from Whitfield's assault to being thrown from a moving train. His musings were interrupted by a low whistle from Cole, signaling that riders were approaching from the south the direction of Trinity. Archer peered through his field glasses, making out 3 figures on horseback. Even at this distance, he recognized Hargrove's imposing form in the lead. "Just the 3 of them," he murmured to himself, slightly disappointed. He had hoped for more of the gang to be present. Still, Hargrove himself was the primary target, and his capture would be a significant victory. The 3 riders slowed as they approached the crossing, clearly wary and alert to potential danger. Archer signaled to Cole and the others to hold their positions. The plan was to wait until whoever Hargrove was meeting arrived, then take them all at once. Nearly half an hour passed with Hargrove and his men waiting impatiently at the crossing. The sun had now dipped below the horizon, leaving only the fading glow of twilight to illuminate the scene. Archer was beginning to worry that their information had been wrong or that the meeting had been canceled when he heard the approach of more horses from the north. 4 riders appeared, moving at a steady trot. As they drew closer, Archer could make out saddlebags and what appeared to be wrapped rifle cases secured to their mounts. This must be the package Penelope had overheard mentioned weapons and supplies for the Fort Davis job. Hargrove and his men rode out to meet the newcomers in the middle of the crossing. Words were exchanged, though Archer was too far away to hear the conversation. One of the new arrivals dismounted and began to untie one of the wrapped packages, presumably to show Hargrove its contents. Archer raised his hand, ready to give the signal to move in, when a shot rang out from the direction of Trinity. All heads turned, including Archer's, to see a lone rider approaching at a gallop, a figure Archer recognized with a sinking heart as Deputy Marshal Lawrence Reed. "It's a trap," Reed shouted as he rode toward the crossing. "Kincaid and the sheriff are waiting to ambush you." Chaos erupted instantly. Hargrove and his men drew their weapons, firing blindly toward the surrounding brush where they now suspected an ambush lay in wait. The 4 newcomers scattered, abandoning their packages in their haste to escape. "Now," Archer shouted, abandoning any hope of surprise. He fired at Hargrove, the shot going wide as the outlaw wheeled his horse around. Cole and his men emerged from their hiding places, guns blazing, but the element of surprise was lost. Reed continued riding straight for the crossing, firing his revolver toward Cole's position with alarming accuracy. Archer raced down the slope toward the melee, determined to capture Hargrove if nothing else. He saw the blacksmith, Mercer, fall from a gunshot to the shoulder, while Griggs exchanged fire with 2 of the newcomers who had taken cover behind rocks on the far side of the creek. In the confusion, Hargrove and one of his original companions broke away, riding hard back toward Trinity. Archer made a split-second decision and changed course to pursue them, spurring Thunder to a full gallop. His blood ran cold as he realized where Hargrove might be heading to eliminate the woman whose testimony could destroy him and Reed. Penelope sat in the small parlor of the Cole residence, a modest but comfortable home about a mile outside of Trinity. Martha Cole, the sheriff's wife, was a kind woman in her late 40s who had provided Penelope with a fresh dress and a warm meal, asking few questions about the circumstances that had brought a bruised and supposedly arrested woman to her home. "More tea, dear," Martha offered, gesturing to the pot on the small table between them. "No, thank you," Penelope replied with a smile. "You've been more than generous already." "Nathan doesn't bring many guests home," Martha commented, her eyes curious despite her restraint. "Especially not ones he's supposedly arrested," Penelope hesitated, uncertain how much Sheriff Cole had shared with his wife. "It's a complicated situation," she finally said. "Your husband is helping to resolve it." Martha nodded, seemingly satisfied with this vague explanation. "Nathan's a good man. If he's helping you, you must be worth helping." Their conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching hooves. Martha rose, moving to the window with a frown. "Nathan said not to expect him back until late tonight," she murmured, peering out into the gathering darkness. "And that's not his horse." Alarm shot through Penelope as she joined Martha at the window. Through the glass, she could make out a large figure dismounting from a horse. Even in the dim light, she recognized William Hargrove's imposing silhouette. "Mrs. Cole," she said urgently, "we need to leave now. That man is dangerous." Martha's eyes widened, but to her credit, she asked no questions. "There's a back door through the kitchen. We keep a shotgun mounted above it." They moved quickly, Martha leading the way through the small house to the kitchen at the rear. As they reached it, a heavy pounding came at the front door, followed by Hargrove's voice, deceptively calm. "Evening, ladies. I know you're in there. I just want to have a word with Miss Blackburn." Martha reached up and took down the shotgun, checking that it was loaded before handing it to Penelope. "Do you know how to use this?" she whispered. Penelope nodded, memories of her father teaching her to shoot flashing through her mind. It had been years, but some skills never truly disappeared. "Good," Martha said. "There's a root cellar behind the woodpile. If we can reach it." The front door splintered inward with a crash, cutting off Martha's instructions. Hargrove's heavy footsteps echoed through the small house, accompanied by the metallic sound of a revolver being cocked. "Come now, ladies," he called, his voice closer now. "No need to make this difficult. I only want the one who should already be dead. The other can walk away unharmed." Penelope gripped the shotgun tightly, positioning herself between Martha and the kitchen doorway. "Go," she whispered urgently. "Get to that cellar, I'll hold him off." Martha shook her head stubbornly. "This is my home, dear. I'm not leaving you to face him alone." Before Penelope could argue further, Hargrove appeared in the kitchen doorway, his massive frame filling the space. His cold eyes fixed on Penelope, a cruel smile spreading across his bearded face. "Well, well," he said softly, "the dead have risen. You're a hard woman to kill, Miss Blackburn." "Not for lack of your trying," Penelope replied, raising the shotgun with steady hands. "Step back, Mr. Hargrove. I won't hesitate to use this." Hargrove seemed unimpressed by the threat. "You know, I've been wondering how you survived that fall." Then I heard tell of a bounty hunter in these parts. Archer Kincaid, former Texas Ranger with a reputation for tracking skills. Seems he's been asking questions about me. Put it all together and here we are. "If you know who's hunting you, then you know you should be running, not threatening more innocent women," Martha interjected, her voice remarkably steady. Hargrove's gaze shifted to her briefly. "The sheriff's wife, I presume? You should have chosen better company, madam. Now step aside." "My quarrel isn't with you." "I won't," Martha declared firmly. "This young woman is under my protection." Hargrove sighed, raising his revolver. "Your funeral." Penelope didn't think, she reacted. The shotgun roared in her hands as she pulled the trigger, the recoil slamming painfully into her shoulder. At such close range, the blast caught Hargrove in the chest, driving him backward through the doorway. He crashed into the wall of the narrow hallway, his revolver discharging harmlessly into the ceiling as it fell from his grasp. "Run!" Penelope shouted to Martha, already moving forward to see if Hargrove was still a threat. The outlaw lay slumped against the wall, blood spreading across his shirt, his eyes glazed but still alive. Penelope kept the shotgun trained on him, but it was clear he was gravely wounded. "You should have minded your own business," Hargrove gasped, blood bubbling at his lips. "Reed will still kill you." "Not if I find him first," came Archer's voice from the shattered front doorway. He stood framed in the opening, revolver drawn, his eyes quickly assessing the situation. Behind him, Penelope could see Martha Cole speaking urgently to a man on horseback, presumably sent to find the sheriff. Relief flooded through Penelope at the sight of Archer, his presence immediately making her feel safer despite the chaos around them. "You're all right," she breathed. "I was about to say the same to you," he replied, moving quickly to her side. His free hand touched her arm briefly, a gesture of reassurance that spoke volumes. "You got him good." "Not good enough," Hargrove wheezed, his voice growing weaker. "Reed's still out there, and the others." "Cole has 2 of your men in custody," Archer informed him coldly. "The rest scattered when your friend Reed showed up to warn you about our ambush. Speaking of Reed, where is he now?" But Hargrove's eyes had gone vacant, his final breath rattling from his chest as the life faded from him. William Hargrove, leader of the Trinity Rose gang, was dead not by the hand of the bounty hunter who had tracked him for weeks, but by the woman he had tried and failed to murder. Penelope lowered the shotgun, her hands suddenly shaking as the reality of what she'd done sank in. Archer gently took the weapon from her grasp, setting it aside before guiding her to a chair in the small dining room away from Hargrove's body. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice gentle as he knelt before her, his hands checking her for injuries. "No," she managed, though her voice trembled. "Just shaken. I've never killed anyone before. You did what you had to do," Archer assured her. "He would have killed both you and Mrs. Cole without hesitation." Martha Cole entered the dining room, her composure remarkable given the circumstances. "I've sent for Nathan," she informed them. "And Mr. Jenkins from next door is standing guard outside in case any more of those ruffians show up." She looked at Penelope with a mixture of concern and admiration. "Are you all right, dear? That was very brave, what you did." "I'm fine, Mrs. Cole." "Thank you for your courage as well," Penelope replied, finding her voice growing steadier. "I'm so sorry about your home." Martha waved away the apology. "Homes can be repaired, lives cannot be replaced." The aftermath of the failed ambush and Hargrove's death was chaotic but ultimately productive. Sheriff Cole returned to find his home in disarray, but his wife unharmed, thanks to Penelope's quick action. 2 members of the Trinity Rose gang were in custody. While the remaining gang members had fled, their planned robbery now impossible without their leader and key members. The most pressing concern remained Deputy Marshal Lawrence Reed, who had disappeared after warning Hargrove about the ambush. However, in a stroke of good fortune, one of the captured gang members, facing the prospect of hanging for his crimes, offered to testify against Reed in exchange for leniency. His statement, combined with Penelope's account of what she had overheard on the train, provided enough evidence for Sheriff Cole to send telegrams to the federal authorities detailing Reed's corruption. 3 days after the confrontation at the Cole residence, Penelope sat on the hotel balcony, watching the sunset over Trinity. The town looked different to her now, no longer a place of danger, but simply another frontier settlement striving for respectability in the vast Texas landscape. Archer joined her, setting a cup of tea beside her before taking the adjacent chair. "Sheriff Cole received a telegram from Austin this afternoon," he said without preamble. "Federal marshals apprehended Reed trying to board a ship in Galveston. He's in custody, and they're sending investigators to interview the gang members Cole has locked up." Penelope let out a long breath, relief washing through her. "So it's really over." "Almost," Archer agreed. "There's still the matter of the charges against you in St. Louis." Penelope nodded, having expected this. "I suppose I should face them. Running hasn't served me particularly well so far." "Actually," Archer said, a hint of a smile playing at the corners of his mouth, "Sheriff Cole included information about your situation in his communications with the federal authorities. It seems that George Whitfield has recently been arrested for embezzlement from his own bank. Several women have come forward with stories similar to yours, and Mrs. Whitfield has provided a statement corroborating your account of events." Hope, fragile but persistent, bloomed in Penelope's chest. "Are you saying the charges might be dropped?" "More than might." "Cole received confirmation this morning. In light of Whitfield's arrest and your assistance in exposing a corrupt federal officer, The charges have been officially withdrawn. You're a free woman, Penelope." The news was so unexpected that Penelope found herself unable to speak, tears filling her eyes as the weight of months of fear and uncertainty lifted from her shoulders. Without thinking, she reached for Archer's hand, gripping it tightly. "I don't know what to say," she finally managed. "Thank you seems inadequate for everything you've done." Archer's fingers curled around hers, his touch warm and reassuring. "You saved yourself as much as I saved you," he said quietly. "I just happened to be riding by when you needed a hand." A small laugh escaped her at his deliberate understatement of his heroics. "Just happened to be riding fast enough to catch a woman thrown from a moving train. I think fate might have had a hand in that, Mr. Kincaid." "Archer," he corrected gently. "After everything we've been through, I think we're well past formalities." "Archer," she agreed, meeting his gaze. The connection between them had grown steadily throughout their ordeal, from rescuer and rescued to allies to something deeper that neither had fully acknowledged until now. "What will you do now?" he asked after a moment, his thumb tracing small circles on the back of her hand. "Will you still go to San Antonio, take that teaching position?" Penelope considered the question. "I'm not sure. Without my savings, starting over will be difficult. And after everything that's happened, I'm not certain teaching is what I want anymore." "What do you want?" The directness of his question caught her off guard. What did she want? For so long, her focus had been on survival, on escaping her past. Now, with that burden lifted, the future stretched before her, full of possibilities she hadn't dared to contemplate. "I want." She began slowly, organizing her thoughts. "I want to never feel helpless again. I want to use what I've learned about people, about survival, about justice. And I want." She hesitated, then decided to be as brave in this as she had been in facing Hargrove. "I want to see where this path might lead, with you, if that's something you might want as well." Archer's expression softened, his gray-blue eyes warming as they held hers. "I was hoping you might say something like that," he admitted. "Because I find myself reluctant to part ways with you, Penelope Blackburn. Even though I'm a school teacher with a penchant for getting thrown from trains," she teased gently. "Especially because of that," he replied with a smile. "Though I'm thinking you might have talents beyond teaching. You've got a natural instinct for investigation and you're steady under pressure, qualities that would serve a bounty hunter's partner well." Penelope raised an eyebrow. "Are you offering me a job, Mr. Kincaid?" "I'm offering you a partnership," he clarified. "In all things, if you're amenable." The implication was clear, and Penelope felt her heart quicken. "That's quite a proposition from a man I've known less than 2 weeks," she observed, though there was no rejection in her tone. "Near-death experiences have a way of clarifying what matters," Archer said simply. "And I know enough to recognize something rare when I find it, or when it falls into my arms from a moving train." Penelope laughed softly, the sound full of joy and possibility. "When you put it that way, how could a woman refuse?" Archer leaned forward, his hand still holding hers, his other coming up to gently brush a strand of copper hair from her face. "I'm not asking for an answer today," he said. "Only that you consider the possibility. We could start with a trip to San Antonio. I have business there, and you could speak with Mrs. Whitfield about that teaching position, see which path feels right." "And if neither feels right," Penelope asked, though she already suspected she knew the answer, "then we find a new path, together." As the last light of day faded into dusk, Archer Kincaid and Penelope Blackburn sat hand in hand on the hotel balcony, no longer pursued or pursuers, but two people who had found in each other something worth holding onto a second chance at life, at purpose, and at love, born in the most unlikely of circumstances on the wild Texas frontier. 6 months later, the town of Redemption, Texas, tucked into the Davis Mountains about 40 miles from Fort Davis, welcomed its newest residents with typical frontier curiosity. The couple who purchased the abandoned mercantile on Main Street were the subject of much speculation, a tall, broad-shouldered man with watchful eyes, and a lovely copper-haired woman whose gentle manner belied the revolver. she wore confidently at her hip. Archer and Penelope Kincaid had married in San Antonio 3 months earlier, in a small ceremony attended by Eleanor Whitfield and Sheriff and Mrs. Cole. The teaching position had been discussed but ultimately declined, as Penelope discovered she preferred the life of a bounty hunter's partner to that of a schoolteacher. Together, they had tracked and captured 3 wanted men between San Antonio and Fort Davis before deciding to establish a more permanent base in Redemption. The Mercantile served as both their home and business, a general store in the front, run primarily by Penelope, while the back rooms housed Archer's bounty hunting operation. It was an unconventional arrangement, but one that suited them perfectly. Archer could still pursue dangerous criminals when necessary, while Penelope applied her quick mind and observational skills to gathering information from the store's customers and maintaining a network of contacts across the region. On this particular spring morning, Penelope stood behind the counter, reviewing their inventory ledger while sunlight streamed through the freshly washed windows. The bell above the door jingled as Archer entered, returning from a 3-day absence spent tracking a cattle rustler. Successful trip? Penelope asked, though his satisfied expression already gave her the answer. Johnson's in the Fort Davis jail awaiting transfer to El Paso, Archer confirmed, setting his saddlebags on the counter before leaning across it to kiss his wife. Didn't even put up a fight once I found him. Your reputation precedes you, Penelope said with a smile. As does your tired appearance. There's hot water on the stove if you'd like to wash up before dinner. Archer nodded gratefully. How have things been here? Any interesting visitors, Mrs. Patterson finally had her baby, a boy, 8 pounds, and I received a letter from Sheriff Cole. He's been appointed to a federal marshal position, thanks in large part to his handling of the Reed corruption case. Good for him, Archer said sincerely. He's a good man. Any word on Reed's sentencing? 20 years in Huntsville, Penelope replied. Justice served, albeit delayed. Archer studied his wife's face, noting the quiet satisfaction in her expression. The bruises from her ordeal had long since faded, but the strength that experience had revealed remained, shaping her into the remarkable partner he was privileged to have by his side. I've been thinking, he said as he picked up his saddlebags. Maybe it's time we took a break from the hunting business for a while. The store's doing well, and we've got enough saved now to be comfortable for some time. Penelope's eyebrow arched curiously. This is unexpected. Any particular reason for this sudden desire to settle down more permanently? Archer smiled, reaching across the counter to take her hand. Just thinking it might be nice to stay in one place for a while, perhaps even expand our family, if that's something you might want as well. Understanding dawned in Penelope's eyes, a soft blush coloring her cheeks as she squeezed his hand. I think that's something I might want very much, she replied, her voice warm with emotion. Though I'm not sure Redemption is ready for a little Kincaid running around. Redemption will adapt, Archer said confidently, just as we have. As they stood together in the sunlit store, hands clasped across the counter, both marveled at the journey that had brought them to this moment, from a desperate rescue along a lonely stretch of railroad track to a partnership that had healed old wounds and opened the door to a future neither could have imagined alone. For Penelope, who had once been beaten and thrown from a moving train with nothing but terror and darkness ahead, life had transformed in ways she could never have predicted. And for Archer, who had ridden fast enough to catch her fall, the reward had been far greater than any bounty, a love as vast and promising as the Texas sky, built on courage, trust, and the remarkable resilience of the human heart. Years later, when their children would ask how they met, Archer would begin the tale with a wink to his wife. Your mother was in a bit of a falling out with some unsavory characters on a train. And Penelope would roll her eyes fondly before adding, and your father happened to be in exactly the right place at exactly the right time, riding faster than any man should reasonably be able to. It was a story of the Wild West at its most perilous and most redemptive, a tale of danger and rescue, of justice sought and found, and of two people who discovered that sometimes the most unexpected falls can lead to the most extraordinary landings.